Good evening, everyone. The Mahoning Matters team welcomes you to tonight's panel, The Kids Are All Right, Getting Back to School in the COVID Age. I'm your host, reporter Justin Dennis, and tonight we'll be talking about Ohio school districts' return to the classroom amid the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges faced by school districts, school officials, educators, students, and their parents. And joining us on tonight's panel are Justin Jennings, Youngstown City Schools CEO, who is offering us a school administrator's perspective, and who just last night addressed the school's return to the classroom during a district town hall. Bill Amendol, a Boardman Local Schools music teacher and a member of the Ohio Education Association Teachers Union, who's offering us a faculty member's perspective. And Traci Hostetler, superintendent of the Mahoning County Educational Service Center, which partners and collaborates with all districts in the county and who can offer us a sort of top-down perspective on Mahoning schools. We've also got a great team working behind the scenes to make this event possible, including McClatchy's events operations manager, Connie Heiberg, and video producer, Beth Welsh, as well as the Mahoning Matters team, senior editor, Eric Nelson, local editor, Mark Sweetwood, content manager Jeremy Harper, and reporters Jess Harden and Alan Wagner. If you, our audience, want to ask a question live about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on schools during tonight's discussion, please leave us a comment on the Mahoning Matters Facebook and YouTube pages just below, which we'll be monitoring. If your question is for a specific panelist, let us know and we'll break into the discussion and ask them. You can also watch the full recording of tonight's discussion later on Mahoning Matters Facebook and YouTube pages. Tonight's community discussion is part of Mahoning Matters' ongoing commitment to bringing people together to talk about the issues that matter the most to our valley. We also hope that you will consider making a one-time or monthly contribution in support of the quality and essential community journalism that Mahoning Matters delivers each day at mahoningmatters.com. So let's ease into this night's discussion by getting an overview of Youngstown City Schools' plan to return to the classroom. Unlike most, if not all, the other districts in the Valley, Youngstown students have been learning fully remote since schools were closed last year due to the pandemic. So, Mr. Jennings, what went into the administration's decision to stay remote, first off?
Well, it was really a safety issue for us. We have a lot of our scholars who go home to elderly parents or elderly guardians, and so that's something we took into consideration when we consider that. And we just wanted to make sure we kept our staff safe as well. So we have a lot of staff members who have some ailments as well, and we just wanted to make sure we kept everybody safe.
And so what kind of planning and preparation got the district to this point where students will be back to in-person learning at least a couple times a week?
A lot of planning and preparation. We've been preparing with PPE and all those different equipment. I mean, really since last June. I mean, we knew eventually we would come back to school, and we knew that at some point there would be a shortage of those things. So we've been ordering those things to make sure we're prepared all the way. We have, just about everything. We have the thermometers, not regular thermometers, but when the scholar steps in or an adult steps in, there's something that takes their temperature right away, so we don't have to go back and do hand thermometers. We have a lot of hand washing stations. We have shields. We have all the cleaning materials. We wanted to just make sure we kept our scholars safe, but importantly as well, we want to keep our staff safe too. We want our teachers to feel comfortable, being there. And making sure that they know that we care and that they're safe. I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping in communication with our teachers so they understand what we're doing.
Are there any similarly sized or similarly situated districts that you're kind of taking notes from on how to manage this return? Are there examples of things that other districts have done right that you'd like to try to follow? Are you taking leads from anywhere?
Well, weekly I have a conversation with Ohio Urban 8, so that would be Akron, Dayton, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus as well. But just to name some, in Canton. But we talk to them also. But we also talk to our teaching staff. We want to know how they feel and how this would affect them as well, because some people are just not comfortable being in that situation. So we knew everybody would not necessarily take the vaccine. But we wanted to make sure that we could keep as many people safe and making sure that we have their safety in mind with every decision we make. It wasn't an easy decision for me. I can tell you I got a little push from some people, but it wasn't an easy decision to make, because at the end of the day, I think that we've been pretty consistent with what we're doing and making sure that our choices that we're making is on the side of human beings and not politics. And that's the difficult part when it comes to this.
What was that kind of moment? You mentioned that it was kind of a hard decision to make. What was that moment when you realized that this was the way that the district was going to go, and what was kind of the turning point, I guess, for you?
Well, I think that it was more of we had to have the opportunity to give people a choice who wanted to be in that situation. But once again, my consideration was for my scholars in the community, but it was also really heavily weighed on my staff as well. Because, like I said, if they're not comfortable being in there, I mean, I'm not saying they're not going to be effective, but they're going to be more worried about their health and safety than being effective, which is human beings being human beings. We're worried about our safety. So we really wanted to make sure that our staff felt comfortable coming in and doing those things.
This will be the first time that Youngstown City Schools have had to report COVID-19 cases in the district, because it's been remote this time. So is there a plan to pass this information along? I know the Ohio Department of Health is collecting and reporting on this, but just explain, what you're thinking about and what the plan is for identifying this.
Well, because the governor was so kind to give us the opportunity to have our wellness money, we have 2 U-Care clinics, or clinics that housed in our high school, in both of our high schools. So we've actually been testing our scholar athletes all along, which is not something that I think other districts have been doing. But we've had to shut down athletics several times because we've had those spikes, and we've had adults, and we have teachers. I mean, we had students as well, student athletes, scholar athletes as well, who've done that. So we have some protocols in place. If they're, for instance, yesterday, I think you mentioned my town hall yesterday, we have some students who are going to be going on vacation and coming back from Florida. Well, we're asking them to follow the quarantine rules, but also we're able to test them with a rapid test in our clinic. And if they do have it, then we'll use the other test, because we know that rapid test is not as effective if they get a false positive.
Mm-hmm.
So we test them, and if they're not, they can start school. So that's something that we're really prepared to do. Dr. Ishmael and U-Care clinics have really been vital in making sure that we keep up with the safety of our scholars and our staff as well.
Thank you very much. And to kind of reframe this question on schools' learning models for you, Mr. Amendol, could you just kind of briefly describe Boardman's situation, how the district's been operating, and what that's been like for educators and students?
Sure. We actually started school. Our plan was to start as normal as possible in the fall. So we started with 5 days of in-person instruction. We shortened those days by 1 hour because one of our other tenets was for all of our community members that attend Boardman schools to receive a Boardman education. So we wanted our teachers teaching our curriculum to every kid, whether they were in person or remote. So every teacher has students that are on the computer screen with them. Like, for instance, in my class, I have students at home on the computer that are live in class with me while I teach the in-person learners. It became a struggle, really a lot of time constraints for all of us to develop the online content that you need. Basically take your in-class things, instead of passing out papers or whatnot, you're scanning all that, you're making different digital products using different software packages for kids to interact with what would normally be a paper pencil item for in-person. So our teachers started to struggle with the time management piece. We had a lot of teachers up very late at night working into the wee hours of the morning trying to develop this stuff. So our district made a shift, and we took Wednesdays and made them fully remote for our students. That allowed us to kind of breathe a sigh of relief and continue to do this. Seamless learning is kind of the way we looked at it for both in-person and remote kids. And it's worked out well, especially with, like I heard Justin say, you have student athletes who end up in quarantine, or just a regular learner ends up in quarantine. They were able to then stay home, continue their education, and return right back to the classroom like nothing happened. So it's worked out really well for us for the course of this year.
Looking back, when schools closed in March, students and teachers were sort of thrust into an unfamiliar setting. This was learning entirely online. And as a music teacher, I expect that was even more complicated. What classroom advantages did teachers or students lose in that shift? And have you maybe learned anything new in this time when we've gotten accustomed to this new box in our lives?
Yeah, it was definitely difficult trying to teach music virtually. Luckily we were to a point in our school year. We're 1 year ago. We were preparing for our spring concerts, so it was the focus, at least for my personal classes, was more preparing for a performance. So we made it through a good majority of the content that we needed to teach for that school year. So our main focus was keep the kids playing as much as possible. I will say that there were a lot of tech companies out there that offered their software trials for free throughout the spring. And it was a good opportunity for us to experiment at that point in time with trying to use some of those to teach music virtually. Gave us an opportunity to see what worked and what didn't, and allow us to prepare a little better for returning to school in the fall. Because honestly, even as you went into June and maybe early July, we weren't sure if we were walking back in the doors or not.
Yeah.
So, it was trying to develop that content and keep kids playing as much as possible. I'll be honest with you, there are, I'm speaking music wise, and I know academically as well, and I'm sure that's part of our conversation tonight. There are definitely some deficiencies we see after a year of this.
Yeah, and you're right. We are going to come back to that later on in the program. But continuing on this, I want to move now to Mrs. Hostetler. The Educational Service Center helped districts prepare their safety plans early on in the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep. We made sure that the districts had access to the health department and obviously one another so that they could collaborate on that.
And what do you think they've learned in this time that prepared them to return, to have this dedicated return to in-person learning here in March?
Well, I described summer as a waterboarding process. I think it was just this inundation of information, and Justin's right. There was a lot of political weighing in, and people who claim to be experts, or very heated on both sides, as you are well aware. But we just made the decision at that time to work with the local health department to follow the recommendation of the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, and so it was just staying on top of that tidal wave was very difficult.
Governor Mike DeWine has said health order compliance is strong in Ohio schools. What sort of disciplinary measures are in place at schools that you may know of for those who don't abide by the pandemic rules when it comes time to enforce things like masking or social distancing? What have you heard of? And
I've not heard of any need for disciplinary actions. Most of the kids, since schools provided the option of staying at home to learn or coming in to learn, parents who felt comfortable masking their children sent their children to school, and parents who didn't feel comfortable masking their children kept their children home. So I'm absolutely unaware of any disciplinary issues. We did address, the what ifs and very early on, and we all agreed that we would treat it much like an infraction for dress code, and kids would be sent home. So I don't think it ever had to go farther than that. There was this great debate over preschoolers and kindergartners wearing masks. We've not had any issues, or at least there have been none that have been brought to my attention.
And just to jump in, it seems like either Mr. Jennings or Mr. Amendol wanted to respond to something just now.
I think yesterday we mentioned in my update that we have to be patient from our standpoint, because our scholars have been, I think it would be the 16th. It would be 365 days that they've been out of school. So, and some of them may not have to you don't have to wear a mask at home necessarily. So it's something that we've asked our staff, our teachers, and administrators to be patient with, to make sure that our job is to educate scholars. And we have to do, sometimes we have to do discipline, but it's not what we went to college for. So we want to make sure that we stick to making sure we educate our scholars.
And last thing, real quick, I just wanted to get a sense of who is helping districts in our area source PPE, the equipment that's going to carry them through this year, if they're going to be, dedicated to being in person.
At the beginning of the year, we had it seems like forever ago now, but we did have a list of PPE companies that were vetted for our districts and that we're ready to roll with a lot. I mean, you can imagine the absolute demand for so many things. Like we waited for hand sanitizer for 4 months, So we did have a list of vetted resources for our districts to use.
Okay. Moving on, I'd like to talk a bit about vaccinations in schools and the timing of this March 1st goal. Governor Mike DeWine set a goal to have all Ohio students back learning in the classroom, or at least via some hybrid model, by March 1st. And for districts that committed to that goal, he offered to expedite doses of the coronavirus vaccine for all educators and staffers who wanted them. First off, Mr. Jennings, where is Youngstown at in its vaccine distribution? I think the district might be just about to be done. And could you give us an idea of how many employees actually elected to take the vaccine?
Yeah, last Friday, we gave our staff the day off in order to get those vaccines. And that way we knew that for those who were like I was yesterday, nature would run its course for about 24 to 48 hours. So we vaccinated over 700 staff members. And that's kind of where we are right now. We did have some staff members who elected not to take the vaccine. So over 700 staff members is actually closer to 850.
And the district, I think, received about 1,100 doses. Is that correct overall?
Correct. We did.
Mrs. Hostetler, excuse me, any insight into how vaccine distributions worked at other districts in the county? What were there any logistical issues or things that they had to get work through?
I'm very intimately connected to that. I did all of the planning with the Department of Health and with our sponsor, Giant Eagle. Was the company that was vetted by the ODH to provide the vaccines. But we had about 3,500 staff members vaccinated, and we averaged, that was around 70, maybe 80% in every district. So no issues. We're actually on our mini clinic right now. So for those who had perhaps had the virus or may have had surgery or been ill with another issue at that time, they now have the opportunity. They'll be getting their second shot here in the next few weeks.
And we talked a little earlier this year about schools struggling to remain open due to teachers being required to quarantine, either because they've been in contact with someone who had coronavirus or contracted themselves. Talk a bit about what this means, having as many educators as we can vaccinated. What does this mean for the reliability of the school week? You know what I mean?
It's a game changer for us. So, as you know, and I'm not sure if your guests know or audience knows, but if a teacher was determined to be a contact with a student, or another student was a contact with a positive case, those people had to quarantine for it. Initially, it was 14 days, and then it went to 10 days. But with the vaccine, and of course, the continued social distancing and masking and that sort of thing, the CDC is recommending that we don't have to quarantine anymore, which means we aren't going to have such a reliance on subs. We're not going to struggle to keep doors open. So that was a game changer for us. And of course, it's only applicable to the people that were vaccinated.
And now shifting to Mr. Amendol, according to the Ohio Department of Health, Boardman Local Schools has reported the most coronavirus cases of any district in the Valley, most of whom were students. Now that's, to clarify, that's since September 7th when the state started recording those figures. And Boardman is also, as we know, one of the largest districts in the Valley. Given that we've now got most of Ohio school employees vaccinated, how do you, as a teacher and a member of the State Teachers Union, feel about the safety and wisdom of now reopening schools across the state? Is this the right time?
Yeah, we've obviously been through quite a bit with our cases, and going back just a second, I guess when you're talking about the staff and shutting the schools down, we actually did have that happen. My wife teaches at our middle school, and it was her building that was shut down, I think, for 3 days because we had so many staff members who were either close contacts or positive themselves. So we've taken as many measures as possible to keep everybody safe. We had the social distancing, all the PPE we could possibly want. We made accommodations for those adults that are high risk in our buildings. And, through all of it, I guess the only silver lining was that aside from athletics, there were very few cases that could be traced back to our classrooms. Most of what we dealt with over that period of time were instances where people, either their parents were positive, so the kids had to quarantine, or adults that were around other adults that were positive or positive themselves, catching it from outside of the school. So as you see those stories come out about that there's very little transmission in the schools, I'd like to say that if we were a test case, that would prove to be the result. So
I'm also wondering the same of you, Mr. Jennings. Do you feel it's the right time for Youngstown City Schools? We kind of went over this question before, but just to kind of clarify it and reach back for that, do you feel it's the right time to come back to the classroom?
No, I don't. But I think that we're going to make sure that we, like I said, keep everybody safe, and not from a safety standpoint, but we're coming back at a time where we're going to do a lot of testing. So you're going to bring the scholars back in. There's going to be a lot of testing. There's not going to be those traditional routines that you would normally have at the beginning of a school year or the school year. So, I mean, we would have rather done it a different way. But I mean, like I said earlier, it's the way we had to do it. So our focus is just making sure that we can keep everybody safe, and also that the learning will continue.
Okay. And we've got several questions ahead of tonight's event, and we've been getting questions live from our live viewers. So I want to get into a few of those right now. Tara asked, many in the community, such as youth serving organizations, small groups, individuals, etc., have stepped up to provide extra support to students and families. And from a school district's perspective, where is community support most needed? And they said school districts, so I think I'd like to hear from Mr. Jennings first.
Where is it most needed? I mean, we
where
have
is
a lot
community
of
support most needed? Yes.
Okay. We have a lot of. I think the social emotional piece is something that we have to focus on, and I think teachers are huge with that. And I think that we focus on our scholars, but we haven't really focused on the effect that it has on the teachers. And even right now, I think Mr. Amendol said earlier, I mean, now what we're expecting our teachers to do is teach kids in the classroom, and at the same time teach kids who are still in front of a computer. That's something that's taxing, is mentally draining. But I can tell you, if something good has come out of COVID, I think the appreciation for our teachers and our administrators have just jumped up phenomenally, because now people really, parents and the community really see the job that they have to do every single day. And it's not, what people normally think, because they can actually see it, especially, some of those parents who had to deal with their children at home and help them with their learning and help them with different things like that.
Mr. Amendol, would you like to jump in, since, he's talking about the sort of personal toll that this has taken on teachers? What have you seen with your coworkers, and what kind of supports do teachers need at this time?
Yeah, this has definitely been difficult for teachers. Like I said to my high school staff, we were in a meeting, and it was right when all the news was breaking about teachers unions going on strike over returning to the classroom. And I told them how proud I was of them for, doing this from the start. Like I mentioned earlier, the double duty of online and in-person teaching definitely raise the stress level and the workload for the teachers. We've learned to adapt. And I guess, to go back to your other question about the what can the community do to help, I think as much support that can be given for the students helps take a little bit of the burden off of the classroom teachers. One of the things we struggle with most are the kids that are remote learners that don't log in, or kids that we know that are home that are hit or miss with coming to class or logging in and doing their assignments. We need that support from the parents at home. We had sort of a contract that parents signed off that they would be the educational support for their student if they chose remote. that's where we probably need the most help is helping the kids that struggle through this. That helps take some of the stress off the teachers.
Dr. Hostetler, anything you'd like to add? Where do you think in other districts we need to see kind of overall community support for the school system right now?
I think these two did a beautiful job of answering that. Justin's absolutely right. We threw teachers in, just without knowing how this was going to play out. It was brand new. People were dying, and none of our teachers complained. And then, as Bill said, you hear all over, teachers unions are striking, not in Mahoning County. And I just couldn't be more proud to be part of all of that. And with the kids, absolutely, I think the best thing that the community could do is support the kids through their neighborhoods or whatever it might be, but just helping those parents who have those kids at home, who are probably a little bit of burnt out from COVID, and just really hitting them there. I think the schools have done a really fine job of making sure kids have what they need that are coming to school. I think it's our remote kids that still need a little bit more extra.
Great, thank you so much. And I think these next two questions from the audience might be directed towards Mr. Jennings. So Chris asked, when will outside support programs like Success After 6 return to the school buildings?
We had to make sure I unmuted myself. I always forget sometimes. We're actually planning before we decided. Well, before we had to go back to school, we were already planning to bring our scholars back in the summertime. So we have some summer enrichment and some summer learning loss that we're doing. So at that time, we're going to make sure that we bring in those community partners, the Red Zone, the Success by 6 United Way, the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, Jewish Community Centers, those people who come in to help us, homework heroes, those people who come in to help our scholars during the year. But actually during the pandemic, a lot of our outside entities have actually been working with our scholars online. So our after school programming, 21st century after school program is still going on. It's just online instead of, physically being there.
And then Patricia asked, how many students, if given the choice, are electing to return to in-school learning? So do you have an idea of who's coming back?
I just so happen to have that number written down because somebody asked me that question earlier. So we had about, well, I'll give you the exact numbers. We have 47.38% of our students who chose to come back hybrid. So that means they're going to come back and forth. We have 20%, about 21% who chose to remain remote, and the rest didn't answer. So about 31% did not respond. So therefore they will remain remote because we had the survey. We put the survey out in order to make sure that we can provide transportation. So that's major. So we did tell people if they did not respond, then they would default to remote. So we have planning for those students who may show up even though they didn't respond to the survey. But right now we won't be able to provide transportation until we get that information. So our goal is to make sure that we educate everybody, but we want to make sure it's convenient as well. And we also ask whatever mode that they chose, that they stick with it until the end of the year. So that way we don't have people flip-flopping, because of course the lunches are involved, breakfast is involved, busing is involved. So it's not just coming to school or not coming to school, but we want to plan for that as well.
Great. Thank you, folks, so much. I'd like to now start talking about the extended learning plans that Governor DeWine wants schools to prepare by the end of this month, which would help students make up for lost learning while they were out of the classroom in this past year. And they're expected to be funded by, I believe, $2 billion in federal COVID relief funding, which was what he mentioned during a recent briefing. And so far in the 2020-21 school year, testing scores at Ohio schools have been generally lower than in previous years, especially for Black, Hispanic, and disadvantaged students, according to the Ohio Department of Education, which looked at how the pandemic has affected results in Ohio schools. Generally, schools with fully remote learning models saw their third grade reading proficiency scores fall. Chronic absenteeism rose across all school levels, especially for Black students, and about 30% of the overall decrease in enrollment in Ohio schools happened in suburban school districts, while urban school districts saw, on average, the largest single enrollment drops compared to other districts. So Starting with Mr. Amendol, you deal with students each day from your personal perspective, and you kind of brought this up a little bit earlier, so I'd like to revisit this. What are some ways that you see them falling behind?
Well, like I mentioned, it's a small percentage in Boardman, but there are a percentage of kids that, for lack of a better way of putting it, are sort of falling through the cracks at this point. They don't log in if they're virtual. I know our school administrators and our school resource officers do what they can to try and make contact with those families. We do, you can't force a kid to come back to school, but we do encourage those students that are struggling with remote to get back into the classroom. I'm sorry, Justin, I lost my train of thought there.
That's okay. What do you think is the disconnect for these kids? I spoke with Dr. Hostetler before about, this missing this in-person component to school and being amongst your peers. But Mr. Amendol, where do you think they kind of lose their way to getting involved in the classroom, to being
it's hard to tell because I'm not on the other end of the computer. It's if they're not logging in because there's not the support at home. There's no one watching over them to make sure they log in. I know we have some students, depending on the level, where we've dealt with situations where the parents are both at work. The students with grandma and grandpa don't understand the technology so well.
Sure.
So the parents said, look, we're not even going to try doing this during the school day. So they miss sort of the live piece of the instruction, and they're doing what they can in the evening. So, they don't get the contact with the teacher that we would like to see them have. And I think that's huge in a child's learning process, is having that specialist, whether it be for English, math, science, music, whatever it is, have that contact time with the children. So if we're missing that piece, I think that starts to, cause the child to fall behind a little bit.
What ways have you seen teachers, either professionally or personally, try to bridge that gap? Any anecdotes or?
Yeah, we have a lot of teachers that, especially for the younger kids, that's where we run into more problems where the child may not be able to interact during the school day. So they're making videos, so they still get, it's a taped instruction versus a live instruction, but it's still a teacher on the other end delivering the lesson. The only thing then that's missing, and that's a huge piece, is for the child to ask questions and interact with the teacher. So they try and fill that void by either email communication or setting up other meeting times. And again, that plays into a little bit of that stress and the burnout maybe that the teachers were feeling, is that they may be now, when your workload used to be between certain hours of the day, now you might be 9-10 o'clock at night trying to do a Google Classroom meeting with some students to try and help them through the assignment for the day. So it's just been a tough time to have that interaction that we always had when students were sitting in front of us in a classroom.
And I'd like to check in with Mr. Jennings. We're talking about this concept of extended learning plans. Now, is Youngstown developing something like this, or in identifying sort of deficiencies in the district? And yeah, I was going to make sure you unmuted yourself.
Yes, we are. I think I said it before. We were already working on extended learning in this summer enrichment before, we had to kind of go back to school order with the vaccines. So we were already doing that. And we use, I see there's a question in the chat that I'm looking at, so I'll answer that with this question. We're using our NWEA scores in order to look at the gaps and look at, the learning loss in order to help our scholars in the summertime. So our goal is to have all of our scholars involved in our summer learning and our summer enrichment programming as well, because we also want to reward those scholars who've logged in and continue to log in. I mean, our attendance rate has dropped a little, but not as much as I think what people think. I was talking to a city official today, and she said that she was told that our attendance rate was about 40%, while our attendance rate is actually about 80%. So we still do have our students logging in, and I think like Mr. Amendol said, there are a lot of students who are not logging in for various reasons. And some of them it is because there's nobody at home to push them to log in. But also, I mean, let's be realistic. If we were teenagers once, if we were at home and we know we're at home for the whole year, and our parents aren't there, we probably wouldn't log in every day either. Maybe not some people at all. So we've had our teachers who've reached out to our scholars. They've gone to the house. They've sat in the driveway. They've done instruction. I mean, we have a lot of support in our buildings. Our parent engagement coordinators. We have our student advocates. We have officers who work in our building, community officers who work in our building, and we try to do what we call porch. We're doing what we call porch checks as well, and we also have some truancy officers. So we've tried to reach out to a lot of our scholars, and some we've reached out to, and some we have no clue. We've recently found out that we had a scholar who the whole time they've been in California because mom had to work every day, and she didn't want to leave them there, so they've been with grandma in California the whole time and learning remotely the whole time. So that's something. Wow. There's a lot of different things that are going on when it comes to those things.
You mentioned an 80% attendance rate, and so this is we're talking about the logging in every day. That's how that's being measured. What was it like before the pandemic? What was that?
We actually before the pandemic last year we were at an all-time high. Not all time, but we were at a high. We had almost a 90% attendance rate. So we that was one of our focuses when I started as CEO. I mean, because as we know, butts in the seat means that we can teach the kids, but if their butts aren't there, then we can't teach them. So that's been a big goal of ours.
When looking at measuring these gaps, what do you think is the number one thing that you feel administration need to zero in on? If you had to pick one thing.
Well, one thing, our focus has been literacy. I mean, that's the key to everything we do, and literacy is included. I mean, it's reading, it's writing, it's thinking, it's speaking, but it's also included in music. It's included in science. It's included in everything we do. So if we can help our literacy and help the literacy of our scholars, I think you'll see a difference in Youngstown City Schools and really all over. I think that's the key.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Justin, we've done a survey at the Mahoning County Educational Service Center of all of the teachers in Mahoning County. Several hundred have responded, and Justin hit it on the head. Everybody is saying that they are seeing currently some lag in reading for informational purposes, reading literature, and then writing. And that just hits, it's K-12, and obviously it hits every subject in the school. So I just wanted to point out, it's the area that we're seeing, those areas throughout the entire county.
And I was actually just going to pose some questions to you. So how is the Educational Service Center sort of partnering with these districts to make sure that these plans get done? I believe Governor DeWine said he wants them to be partners in planning this out. What's the work look like on your end?
Well, so we have a teaching and learning department that consists of 12 individuals with all different areas of expertise. Right now, they're running a book study with teachers that is a writing framework. They're also continuing their professional development. We've adjusted our professional development schedules to be after school hours. So, to sort of mitigate the issue that we faced with substitutes and not having enough substitutes. So we will continue to put on sessions for teachers, but at this point we're gathering that data, and my team will be working on those areas and mitigating those areas through professional development for teachers that they can apply to students. And then also we are partnering with Dr. Larwin, who will be looking at NWE data, as Justin mentioned earlier, to evaluate many different ways, but we can evaluate students against themselves in present year and past years, and we can evaluate different cohorts of students and really hone in on those schools that used up NWEA as a sample and make it applicable to the entire county.
Just to clarify before we move on, could you explain what NWEA means, what it stands for?
Yeah, what does it stand for, Justin? We're just so used to saying it, but it's MAP testing, and it's a standardized assessment that kids take. It's a vendor assessment, is what we call them. Okay. So some districts utilize that particular assessment, but it's Justin. Can you speak more to that, or did I do an okay job?
You did an okay job. You did a perfect job. It's an adaptive test that we use for growth. We measure growth with that, or we measure lack of growth with that. If you ask me what it stands for, it's like Northwest Educational something. I don't remember.
Yeah,
But we just call it NWA.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's used for just to kind of show growth with them. And like I said, it's an adaptive test.
Okay.
I guess that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
It does read influency is what we look at the most. They read influency and those different things.
All right. And one last thing for Dr. Hostetler, or actually anyone could jump in on this. What sort of resources or skills do you think districts need to be employing right now to make these extended learning plans happen? The governor has talked about having resources available to make sure this happens, but what else do you think districts should be thinking about or trying to do at this point?
Well, I can start certainly saying staffing. It's not going to happen without staffing.
Sure.
And the fiscal resources to pay for that staffing. Of course, busing. Some parents have alternative plans for their kids in the summer because they work. But the plans could be a multitude of things. It could be extending the school day. It could be remote options. There is really a lot of leeway for districts to make those determinations based on the individual district needs. So those are the big ones, though, I'd say.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add anything to that? Or?
Well, earlier, I don't know if the governor misspoke, but the money for this is actually ESSER 2. So we did ESSER 1 already, and maybe they called it something else, but that's what we call it in our local school district. So the money for this is actually coming from ESSER 2, and this is the round that we just got about 3 weeks ago. So ESSER 3 money that was just passed, was it yesterday or Sunday, is a little down, is somewhere down the line. So he may use a percentage of that money with his own discretion, but the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 money is what we're going to use for this extended learning time. Is what we're being asked to use.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
I want to go back to some more viewer questions. Kimberly asks, how do you suppose the state will modify school district report cards, which will certainly be impacted by the modified learning situation due to COVID? And there is a certainly large number of children who are lagging, even though districts have done all they can do to keep things going. So what do you think is going to change for how we measure school districts moving forward because of the pandemic?
Are you asking that to me?
Yeah, I guess we could start with Dr. Hostetler.
Well, I will say this, and I'm going to apologize before I speak, but I think that they are not going to modify the report cards. I think the report cards are meant to be punitive to public schools. And I think that they'll give us some reprieve from them for a few years, perhaps, I hope. But there's so much that is impacted by those report cards, including ed choice and vouchers and fiscal situations that really harm public schools. So I would lay money on the fact that they are not going to modify the report cards whatsoever. They're still going to report the scores as they are. It's going to reflect negatively on schools because we're expecting to see some delays, as this whole show is about. But I do expect that we'll see some leniency on maybe some negative impact from those scores.
And Mr. Jennings, any thoughts on how this could change the ways the ODE measures school districts?
Man, I was hoping you would skip me on this one because I'm going to be like Traci.
Everyone gets one skip.
I know. No, I'll answer the question, but it might not. This is going to be live and recorded, so it might come back to bite me later. But I think Traci said it more eloquently than I can. And even right now with the federal government, they said, well, we're not going to count the test. The problem is not just counting the test. So for instance, for Youngstown, even if we test well, it doesn't count anyway, because that won't help us get out of academic distress. So that's one thing. But even if you don't count the test, those scores are still going to be published, and it's still going to go back to, look, the public schools aren't doing what they need to do. But there's so many other factors that comes into play, besides testing. And it's not a reflection of our staff and our teaching staff and how hard they work. It's a test. I'm an example. I was a terrible reader when I grew up. I was a terrible test taker, but that didn't mean that I couldn't be successful. But yet and still, that's what we base base it on. And especially, I mean, in the state of Ohio, I mean, it seems like charters are the way. But when we really take the time and look at the data, they aren't producing anything different than what we're doing in public schools. So, I mean, I think that people should have a choice, but let's if we're going to do that, let's be honest with what's going on, and let's not make it seem like the public school system is not doing anything or we're terrible, because we're not. We're not producing anything any different. And one of the things that we can't do, that charter schools and other people can do, is we can't send kids somewhere else. When they come to us, we have to take them. If you're at a charter school and your tests are bad or you bad behavior, hey, go back to Youngstown City Schools. They do it all the time, and they will do it anywhere else. So that's something we have to consider as well when we look at tests. But then we get into some of the tests we take are culturally biased, so that's not going to be beneficial to a school district like Cleveland, a school district like Columbus, a school district like Youngstown. So I'll jump off my soapbox, but yeah, when it comes to testing, it's not the end all. We do have to have some sort of accountability, but it has to be even across the board.
And I would also like to get Mr. Amendol's take, since everyone else weighed in on this.
It's, I would probably echo what both of my fellow panelists said, and just sum it up quickly with making the statement that I believe the standardized testing that public schools are forced into is an unfair measure even in a non-COVID time. It's even, exponentially unfair to have us take these tests and then hold the schools accountable with this report card piece, being the situation that we've been given, handed to us over the course of the past year.
Could that situation that you referenced be maybe the start of another push to take a second look at this, considering that the whole system got flipped on its ear this past year?
I'm gonna take a page out of Justin's book. It's hard because this is live and this is recorded, and my personal feelings on the testing is it should just completely go away. Okay. It's a standard forced on education by politicians. My personal opinion is it's a way for somebody to make some money off of public schools. Wow. So, if you take the standardized testing out and allow us to go back to educating kids where the test is not hanging over our head, and let's be honest, I'm not going to say every teacher does this, but when that's the main focus of administrators, teachers, all the way down through, then that's going to be the thing that you're looking at every single school year to make sure you achieve that goal as best you can. Yeah. If we get rid of that testing, we can go back to educating kids the right way.
Well, I'd like to now segue into a new topic, and that's the state of schools' performing arts programs, specifically live performances. Since we were talking a bit before the show about what's been happening, arts programs have been continuing, but the live component, the chance that students get to play in front of a live audience, to have their families and friends, watch them perform, something that athletes have gotten to do during the pandemic, but it's something that I feel like lots of arts students haven't gotten the same benefit from. School sports, the governor cited, was a benefit to a well-rounded academic life, and like I said, those sports programs have seemed to mostly returned. Some of the performing arts programs aren't back to 100% as they were before the pandemic. We did some brief research and found that a few districts in the area had said at least or were considering a in-person performance for the remainder of the school year. And you had mentioned that Boardman was considering it, Mr. Amendol. Talk a bit about where that kind of stands at this point.
Yeah, we had a department meeting a week or two ago, and we're doing the best we can to figure out ways to do performances, at least with our high school students. Like I mentioned as we were talking a little before the show, one of our biggest struggles is not necessarily the audience piece, but how do we put all the performers on stage? Boardman has some rather large ensembles. For example, I have a middle school group that would probably be close to 150 performers. I definitely can't maintain 6 feet of distance between those children, and be hard pressed to maintain a 3 foot distance. and some of them play wind instruments would have to be unmasked and being that close.
Sure.
Just not sure if that's safe at this time. So what we're looking at is potentials as the weather turns nice, do some outdoor performances. I know like our jazz band's talking about playing at Boardman Park. Our chorus is looking at doing something outdoors. Our orchestra department, we have a rock orchestra, and we're looking at doing a stadium show this year, which we've never done. So, it's how can we give the kids that performance experience? Because let's be honest, that's what most of them are there for. That's the end all be all to doing all the, you do all this work to do a 1 hour or 2 hour show. We're doing the work now without ever seeing the payoff. So, it's become a struggle to keep the kids engaged and motivated, because they know that reward and that performance, that moment to perform for your family and friends is never going to happen. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that, the health regulations with the vaccinations and everything, maybe we hit that 50 out of 100,000 and things can start to return to be a little more normal. With the outdoor venues, we can at least have some audience that's spread out. We can spread out our performers a little bit more and start doing some shows. It honestly depends on if and when the guidelines change, whether that comes from the governor's office, the health department, and of course then it needs to trickle down to the county and have our county health department approve our plan for doing the performances in the end. So it's a wait and see. We get asked this question a lot, and as we've been discussing it, my thoughts have been things are getting better. Let's kind of give it another few weeks, because we're talking about performing in May. It's March. Maybe April we can make an educated decision and say, okay, this is exactly what we can do.
And just to clarify something you mentioned earlier, that the state has put out health orders, restrictions on things like performing arts venues, sporting venues. In last week, I believe he announced that these orders would be rescinded once the state hit a threshold of 50 new COVID-19 cases per 100,000 population over a period of 2 weeks. So then once we hit that point, this is kind of a signal that not that we're out of the woods, but that we're at kind of a more manageable, moderate spread or transmission of the virus. So just to clarify that for our audience who might not be familiar with that concept. Dr. Hostetler, can you kind of give us an overview of performing arts programs elsewhere in the county? We've heard of schools in Trumbull and Columbiana counties that were planning or possibly considering putting on a live performance. At this point, we know of only Canfield, and actually I'm publishing a story about what they're doing tomorrow on mahoningmatters.com. So what have you heard and what do you know?
Well, we meet with the health department every Wednesday, the group of superintendents and I, and we just had a meeting today. Everybody's chomping at the bit to get some new guidance on not only performances, but proms coming up, graduations coming up. So the health department really believes that rather quickly the ODH will start weighing in on some of that. And again, it really does, it's really going to be dependent on the numbers. But I really love hearing from Boardman that, they're trying to be creative, that they're now taking their performances outside. And I just didn't want to end any conversation without just admiring that constant desire to pivot and change, and in an awful situation, still try to bring as much joy as they can to kids. It's a true testament to their professionalism. But back to your question, Justin, I expect that very soon we should have some guidance, especially if the numbers continue to go down. And I think you're going to see some of this lifted before the year. I really do. I know that every district is hoping to do performances and festivals and things like that.
Mahoning Matters asked Governor DeWine during a recent briefing specifically about this. And the last time we asked, he told us that we could expect some specific guidance from the state as well as from local health departments in the coming weeks. So, and then now on to Mr. Jennings. How do performing arts factor into Youngstown's plan? Can you share any insight into what's happening?
Well, Since I started here, we really didn't have a huge performing arts program, not a lot of programming. So actually part of our summer enrichment programming will be the performing arts, in which we will start our music in younger levels. Because normally in Youngstown, you wouldn't even pick up an instrument until you were in middle school. And we know, I can't see his face because of the way that the screen is, but I know Bill is like rolling his eyes. I mean, but we know that it has to happen earlier.
We can check.
But so that's something that we're working on right now. But it has given us other opportunities. So we started an esports in one of our high schools for the entire district, and we're going to actually start another esports team at Cheney. So we have one at East, and we're going to start one at Cheney, because we want to give those students an opportunity who are not athletes to still be able to perform. I mean, for me, performing arts is huge, because my daughter was one of those. Even though I'm 6'6", my daughter was 6'1", and she couldn't pick up a basketball or do anything, but she was great with theater and great with singing, and which I didn't even know. But without that opportunity, she would have struggled in high school. So we want to make sure that we don't miss out on those things, but we also want to make sure that our scholars get that opportunity, because it builds into everything you do. It helps create organization. It helps create how our scholars can schedule their time. I mean, music teachers are some of the greatest teachers you can ever find, and they're just fun to be around. So we want to make sure that we can expand the arts for our kids to have that opportunity.
Thank you so much. And moving on, I just have some kind of general questions. We're kind of coming toward the end of the show, and just wanted to pose these to everyone. So I guess we'll start with Mr. Jennings. I know you just spoke, but let's start here again. What's one misconception that you'd like to clear about the public's understanding of COVID-19 and how it relates to schools? What sort of things are you hearing that you'd like to set the record straight about?
I think for us, it's really there's not a lack of collaboration with our teachers, and I think teachers, period. I know that we've tried to keep our teaching staff and all of our staff abreast of what we're doing at all times. We do weekly messages. I talk to the union president, because I think it's important for us to continue to keep that message out there. And I think that everyone has to understand that our decisions are made to keep everybody safe. And I think that's a misconception. We don't do things based on politics or anything else, but we really want to make sure that people understand we are trying to keep our staff safe. But at the same time, we're still focused on what we're in the business to do, and that's teaching and learning.
And Mr. Amendol, are there any misconceptions that you hear among parents or other educators about how things work, or the pandemic? Anything you feel needs to be clarified?
No, not too much. I think most of what we're dealing with, people are understanding. That I guess my message would be that are with proper social distancing, PPE, and all the safety precautions, our schools are safe. So I think it's okay to come back to the classroom.
And then same question to you, Dr. Hostetler. Any way that you can clarify some misconceptions you've been hearing?
Yeah, the big one for me is that, and I know the governor keeps saying, we got to get everybody back to school. We got to get everybody back to school. Largely, the districts in Mahoning County have been
they've been here.
Yeah. So, and Justin's fabulous. I think Justin knows I'm one of his biggest fans. He's got different situations to work through and work around. But that said, all of the other districts in the county have been back since they could come back in August. With the exception of course, having to shut down because of COVID. So, and that was all temporary. So I think it's just a giant shout out to all of them for their efforts.
Well, thank you. And now we have reached the end of tonight's discussion. Unfortunately, I want to thank our panelists again for joining us tonight. Youngstown City Schools CEO Justin Jennings, Boardman Local Schools teacher Bill Amendol, and Mahoning County Educational Service Center Superintendent Dr. Traci Hostetler. If you joined us late in the program, sorry for you, and want to catch up on what you missed, we'll have a recording of tonight's panel discussion available later on our Facebook and YouTube pages, as well as an article from reporter Jess Harden tomorrow morning on MahoningMatters.com. And again, this community discussion is part of Mahoning Matters' ongoing commitment to bring people together to talk about the issues that matter the most in the Mahoning Valley. If this mission to keep our community connected and informed matters to you, we ask that you consider making a one-time or monthly contribution in support of the quality and essential community journalism that Mahoning Matters delivers each and every day at mahoningmatters.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night, and let's be careful out there.